I cracked a joke this past weekend because I was out walking with someone and these people, and just on a little street, and people came riding by on bicycles and they were wearing helmets. And when I was a boy, I rode my bicycle to school every day. And certainly I didn't wear a helmet. And no one I knew wore bicycle helmets. And I can understand wearing a bicycle helmet if you're mountain biking and the thing's going down the trail. And there's nothing wrong with wearing a bicycle helmet. But the idea, I told this person, you know why we're able to get to the moon in 8 years? It's because in those days we didn't wear bicycle helmets. When the first President Bush in 1989 started his space exploration initiative, NASA went off, and instead of figuring out how to do it, they had a whole group of people run off and set requirements that the people who would try to figure out how to do it would have to satisfy. So these guys went open loop and set a whole bunch of requirements. And for example, they required that every stage have a two-engine out capability. That means that it could function well if two of its engines failed. And if you do the math and you consider issues of symmetry and so forth, this means that every stage has to have at least 5 engines. Now, if you look at the Apollo hardware, okay, the S-4B stage, the stage that did translunar injection, had 1 engine. The command module had 1 engine. The lunar descent module had 1 engine. The lunar ascent module had 1 engine. Okay, and if they had insisted that every one of those stages had 5 engines, they wouldn't have been able to do the mission. And obviously, if anyone had insisted that the great explorers of the past guarantee safety, whether we're talking Lewis and Clark or Columbus or Captain Cook, they never would have been able to set forth. The question is, look, everybody dies. The question is, what are you going to achieve in your life? Do we as a society, are we going to maintain the kind of ethic that allowed people to take risks to do great achievements, which is, in my view, an element of freedom in a very fundamental sense, and the sense of having personal responsibility, the dignity that comes with personal responsibility? Or do you say no, where you basically reduce the entire society to infantilism, where someone else decides for you what's safe enough for you to do? There are different things that work in our culture, to return to your question. I don't think it's inevitable that we succeed. I think we can succeed. I think there's a lot that supports the idea that we should be able to succeed. There's any number of heroic episodes that we can point to in the past of what human beings have done that show that we can rise above littleness and achieve great things at certain times. But there's a risk. Let me tell you a story. When I was 13, 1965, it was Memorial Day. Memorial Day was a holiday that was set up to honor the Union Army at the end of the Civil War, our Civil War, which ended in 1865. The Army of the North that ended slavery. So, and it's a holiday here. And I was in a small town in upstate New York, and there was a Memorial Day parade, as there generally is. And it was being done by veterans, as it generally is. And some of them were wearing some Civil War regalia, even though, of course, these men were not Civil War veterans. They were, for the most part, World War II veterans. But who better qualified, who better deserving to honor the veterans of the Grand Army of the Republic, the Union Army, than the veterans of Normandy and Tarawa, okay, who had reaffirmed those traditions themselves, okay? Now, and indeed, it would be certainly a sad thing if the U.S. armies had no victories to claim since the Civil War. So those people, they were really entitled to, in a very real way, to honor that memory. But we recently, a couple of years ago, we had the 40th anniversary of the Apollo moon landing. And there's still a few Apollo astronauts around. And there may be a few around at the 50th anniversary, perhaps not at the 60th. It has a sad quality to it that we have no great deeds in terms of human space flight to honor since 1969. In 2019, we're going to honor the 50th anniversary. For us to be people who deserve to do the honoring. We should be, at the same time we do the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11, we should be doing the 5th anniversary of Mars 1. And if we let these things fade into the past, where, okay, there's still people around who can remember how we did it during Apollo and how we embraced risk and went ahead and got the job done and cut through the bureaucratic red tape and all the rest. But if we let this thing fade ever more deeply into the past and lose the living memory of it, then it becomes like Christopher Columbus, where these people are no longer people. They're demigods. They live in a different reality when people did things like that. We are no longer a common species with them. And it's that loss of continuity and common identity that we have to avoid, because if we lose that, we'll really be starting from scratch.
How is tomorrow going to look like?
I think it's going to be sunny. Well, no, right now we definitely have a fight on our hands. You have a situation here and in Europe, and I don't know that much about what's going on right now in New Zealand, but I imagine the economy there must be in difficulties as well, because it's a global economy. And some people will say, well, in times like these, space is something that we just can't afford anymore. We could do that when we were rich, but now we're broken, so we can't do that anymore.
I hear that a lot.
Sorry. Well, that's a big mistake, and we have to fight against that. We are where we are today because we are following on people who were willing to take risks, who were willing to expand frontiers, who were willing to go where people never went before and do things that had never been done before and challenge themselves and challenge their children to go further. And that's the kind of culture we have to be. And if we become a status quo culture, we're going to lose everything. Our parents gave us a better world than the one that they found. They gave us a bigger world than the one that they found. We have to make it our business to give a bigger universe than the one we found to our children, or we will have become less than the people who gave us what we got.
This is beautiful. Thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome. See you on Mars.
Absolutely. Get a fire going, get the atmosphere all sorted out, and we'll come and do a podcast there.
And now, just to finish up, we've got to say thanks to all the people who have contributed to make this podcast possible. First off, a huge thanks to the New Zealand Science Media Centre for allowing us use of their recording equipment.
Thanks to the amazing composer Rian Sheehan.
The intro and outro music. Thanks to the Kiwi Space Foundation.
And thank you, World Space Week Association.
And finally, a huge thanks to our wonderful guest today, Robert Zubrin, for being an absolute inspiration and for trying to get humankind to colonize Mars within 10 years.